I've requested a former colleague and an old friend, Sandeep Bhushan, to come and take a session for us and talk about customer journeys in today's digital world. Actually, what he said to say was it's not just digital, it's a combination of online and offline and therefore an omni-channel world. Sandeep comes from the best of multiple worlds. He started his career at Hindustan Lever, at Unilever in a consumer products company. He went on to do media at the Hindustan Times and then spent a fair bit of his time with Meta, where he was, I think, head of sales for Facebook. Essentially, his expertise is in understanding customers, their behavior and the best channels to reach them. He is currently using that knowledge and applying it and sharing it with all of us as a doctoral student, a board member and as an academician. He is also a teacher at a couple of institutes. I have great pleasure in inviting Sandeep Bhushan and asking him to share a lesson, a session on customer journeys.
Hello and welcome to this virtual class in the series Foundations of Entrepreneurship. Today we're going to talk about customer journeys. I'm sure you've heard the phrase many times. Today we will go a little bit deeper into the concept. My name is Sandeep Bhushan. I'm a student like many of you. I'm a doctoral researcher. Before this, I have worked in corporate in the areas of marketing and strategy. I currently work with many entrepreneurs and I'm in fact on the board of a startup and I'm learning with all of us in terms of what is the latest that we can do in the context of the new world. And in fact, today's lecture will introduce us to the concept of customer journey in the context of where we all are today. It is very different from where the world was 10, 12, 15 years ago. So with that context, let me start. So we've heard the phrase customer journey. In the simplest terms, we are talking about how a consumer or a customer first hears or gets any awareness of your brand. From that point on, the question is whether the consumer will go further in considering the brand, meaning thinking about it and thinking whether it actually satisfies a need for them. They will then likely go and evaluate it against other brands, other offerings, at which point they may decide it's not good enough or may decide this serves my purpose, it is the right value and I trust the brand to solve the problem as promised in their advertising, and then the purchase happens. After purchase, you hope the consumer is loyal and stays with you and buys again and again. So this is a customer journey where each of these activities are fundamentally decisions consumers are taking, and as marketers, entrepreneurs, business owners, our responsibility is to aid the consumer in their choice. Remember, they're not waiting for us. They are here to solve their needs. What is it that we can do to make our products and services relevant for them? And the relevance is not a one-stop, one discussion agenda. It happens over and over again across the customer journey, all the way to driving loyalty. So let's look at an example. You're all students and you took a choice of what college or school you will study your current degree in. How difficult or complex is that decision? How many people are involved? How many pieces of communication did you receive? How many did you receive passively? Saw it on Facebook, for example. How many did you explore and search? How many did you do virtually, which is, let's say, online? How many touch points aided the decision by going on the ground into those colleges, meeting those professors. As you can see, all of this is not a linear activity. You did many of these things. So let's say you saw an ad, you loved a college, but when you talked to a fellow student who's already there, the review was not good. You went all the way back into now searching for more options, right? And this is the point of the journey not being linear. And we just spoke of an example from your life in the area of education, which you could argue is one of the most involved categories. Later in the course, in the lecture, we'll talk about an example where the stakes are not so high. We'll talk about going to the movies, but we'll get to that in a bit. So this is a visual representation of the decision journey. You've heard these phrases before. There are various models, but at the simplest visualization, it's a funnel. First, a consumer becomes aware, but of all the consumers who are aware, only a few consider you or your brand on whether it is truly going to satisfy their need at the right value. Meaning, the number of people who actually go into considering your brand or your offer is a smaller number and is a subset of those who are aware. And that is why you see that it is an inverted triangle. Of those who consider, some actually go on and purchase. And this movement actually, therefore, we are seeing loss at every stage of the triangle. That loss is friction. Meaning, I am aware, but I choose not to consider. The friction of all the questions that they had in their mind that you as a brand could not solve and therefore lost those consumers, that's friction. So there is awareness friction, consideration friction, conversion friction, meaning there are barriers that consumers encounter in taking the decision which prevents them from buying your product. The opportunity is helping those consumers with the right information at the right time, the right experience at the right time, and preventing consumers who start awareness to stop going further in the journey. Now, the interesting game, of course, is we just spoke of the education example. Consumers don't go like this, they go almost circularly, right? People go down, people go up. Then why use this funnel? We use this funnel actually to always remind ourselves that one, this is the shape of the of this diagram, which is the next stage is always smaller. We also use this diagram to remind ourselves that it doesn't matter whether consumers gone back or forth, at this moment they are at one of these points. So let's say a consumer went to a website, put a product in the cart, was almost about to buy, and for whatever reason says, maybe I'll come back tomorrow, maybe I'll check prices. This consumer has now gone back into consideration because multiple other brands are also trying for their attention. So the question is, as a company, as a brand, you can decide whether you are going to treat the consumer as a conversion level consumer, do more, give a discount, or imagine that the customer has gone back and therefore send them more communication saying you may not be convinced of our offer, please see more features of our product. So that is why, while the consumer journeys are complex, we follow a linear modeling to remind ourselves that there are always going to be frictions that we should take care of. And at any point of time, we have to assess where the consumer is in their journey to give them the right inputs. And we will see an example of what inputs look like. Many years ago, you could argue that journeys were very simple. You had one TV channel, you had one national newspaper or a city newspaper, you had one kind of retail outlet, and you had only so many offerings. There were no influencers. There was a world when there were no influencers, where there was just advertising and there was retail. But today, as we discussed again in the previous example, there's a data of 20 plus channels. I think there are way more channels. A channel as a touch point is both where you see the ad and where the product is available. So a marketplace such as Amazon.com is both making you aware of the product but is also selling the product. So when we say multiple touch points, Between retail presence and advertising or influencer presence, we have almost an uncountable number of channels. Each channel is moving the consumer further down the journey or pulling back the consumer. So that's the challenge number one. Second, as a marketer, you want to know which channel made the consumer move further in their journey towards purchase. But nobody knows whether before going to the outlet I scrolled my Facebook or I saw an ad, or whether the shopkeeper actually was a better storyteller than the influencer ad that I saw, or whether finally the price discount advertising was better than the quality ad, the ad saying my quality is better. So there is massive difficulty. That's a new challenge. Third, each part of your funnel is collecting some data that a consumer walked into my retail store, that a consumer saw my ad, but these data points are very difficult to bring together. And that's a classic big data problem on how do we bring data points together to find some analysis of therefore what should be done. And of course the last one, which is really in some sense personifying you, the consumer, you as in the student, your generation, with the options that you have both in terms of media and in terms of categories, is changing expectations. All of us almost want everything personalized perfectly because we now are living in an economy where there is tremendous amount of choice and tremendous amount of channels that allow us to exercise that choice. So now you bring all this together. There is no telling how the brand can control the consumer journey, but all we can do is try and be as close to the consumer's mind at each point to move them forward. So what is our opportunity? Now this is our challenge, right? But what is our opportunity? Which means at the awareness stage, what can we do as a company? At a consideration stage, what can we do, and so on and so forth. Now as you can see, take the simplest example, the add to cart in an e-commerce setup, or when you've tried a product, let's say you're trying a blazer or a suit in a retail store, you've put it on. From that point on, you're very close to purchase, whether we're talking about the online example or the offline example. What are all the tools that are available? For example, number one is take away any worries about if this product doesn't work, then what happens? So, am I offering at that point a return policy or a full cashback policy? Anything that convinces me that this will not be a poor decision in the case the product does not deliver to what I now think it will. Or pricing is an opportunity, such as we've seen discounts, we've seen cashbacks, we've seen 1+1 offers, various ways in which whatever value that I'm seeking, value meaning quality by price, can I make it better either by increasing quantity or dropping price? Because we can never forget that at each point in the mind of the consumer, even while they're trying your product, even while they're adding to cart, they never forget that there's another offering in the market. Imagine you're trying a suit, right in front of you is the next brand of the same category with a model modeling that product. You could lose a consumer there. So you do want to, just at the point of purchase, think of all the options you have to make sure they move forward. Consumer has the right to move backward, right? So that's the thought on how, therefore, we break down all the stages, all the frictions, and think creatively of how we can help the consumer move forward. But be aware that our chance of winning is low. And that is actually, again, the shape of the funnel, because we win less than we lose to another competitor. And therefore, we're constantly thinking of what information we have about the consumer. So if I understand you a little better, I can offer you what you really need. And this is therefore a real world example of how it operates in a category. So here's a category of hair loss. So there's a consumer who's having a hair loss problem, right? So this is a classic FMCG category example. So as we saw, a consumer becomes aware on their own head they notice hair thinning, or a friend tells them there's hair thinning, right? And then you go further, you start looking for stuff, or an ad pops up on YouTube, reads a blog, evaluates, right? Okay, I like this ad, let me go to the website and see what's happened, what other consumers are saying, take some analysis. Now, as we spoke, this is a journey that we should expect, right? I'm aware, I like your offering, I go further. But this is the challenge that I spoke of earlier. Even if as a brand you've done all the hard work of nudging the consumer in this direction, at every stage, because the consumer is evaluating your customer value proposition, which you've heard in another lecture, versus the other customer value propositions of other brands, they have entirely the right to go back. And that's why this is a game of snake and ladders, which is you can do the hard work, but you can also lose at any point. Now, the interesting thing is, if we can figure where the consumers at this point, here or here, we then offer appropriate messaging or parts of the marketing mix, such as price change is a part of marketing mix that I will change to a consumer who's added to cart but has not bought, and I'm thinking maybe a 10% discount might get the consumer. So you will have seen many times, if you put add to cart and don't come back, many marketers will retarget you in digital media and say, please come back. We give you a little offer or a coupon or friends referral and so on and so forth, right? So fundamentally, think of consumer journeys as a game of snakes and ladders, right? Where you can keep moving the consumer in the direction you want, but every point you can lose it. So what can we do at each point, therefore, becomes the interesting question. Now, the interesting part here is that all our brands exist in a multi-channel setting, right? Which is, typically a brand will exist on an e-commerce website, it'll have its own website, it'll be available in a physical space. Now, if a consumer goes to the website, let's say I want to buy, a simple example, this shirt. I went to the website and I clicked on the color blue and I chose not to buy. I also chose my size. So let's say my size is medium blue, and the color is blue of a shirt. I have now abandoned the cart. I'm not buying on the website. 5 days later, I go to the same company's store because I was shopping and that store or the retail store is in the vicinity. I walk in and there's a salesperson there. For the salesperson, it is impossible to map whether I am in the awareness stage or in the concentration stage. If the salesperson knew that I've tried a blue shirt in M size or I put that in the cart, the sales pitch changes completely, saying, welcome back. Here's the blue shirt that you liked. If you tried it, you'd be even more convinced. And by the way, here's our offer on, if the color fades, if you don't like it, we will exchange it for any other product, any other color. The difference between, therefore, starting the journey afresh versus building off the previous interaction with the brand is what is actually the difference between multi-channel and omni-channel, right? So we want to be building systems where we understand about our consumers in every way possible and capture the information as much as possible of what they have done. So imagine in this scenario, if my phone number was on the website and as I enter the store, by whatever incentive, the consumer asks me, do you know our business? Have you ever shopped before? Give me your details. And if it pops up in front of him on his monitor that this is a gentleman who's actually looked at a shirt, it changes everything. And as you can straight away imagine, the chance of therefore converting to sale has changed many fold. So one of the ways of the getting close to the consumer in the journey is actually capturing where the consumer last interacted with you, right? So when we look at consumer understanding now pretty much works in two broad buckets. One is the whole area of insighting on what consumers truly need, what should we produce, what should be our marketing mix. Second is, even after the consumer enters the funnel, we then update all our understanding of the consumer, not in cohorts, not in aggregates, not in samples, not that 10,000 consumers love blue shirts, so we make blue shirts, to the level of one, which is this consumer wants a blue shirt, so let me make sure that as they enter, because if you look at digital advertising today, I'm sure you've had this experience, if you actually go and add into cart any product, whatever your interest is, whether it's cricket or cycling or soccer or shopping, ad retargeting now happens to exactly that category that you have chosen to engage with, whether on Amazon or on the company website, right? That same logic, if we build across all our interaction points, is the true omni-channel experience. It is difficult, but that is one of the new opportunities available because consumer data, more and more with the right tools, can be brought together. Of course, there are rules about how we do this, but fundamentally, we push for getting to know the consumer to move the consumer down the funnel. That's the omni-channel approach. In the multi-channel world, before we had data, what would we do? We would understand that a lot of consumers, for example, let's say a new brand, you just did television advertising and nobody has bought. You can always go and check that my ad has reached many, many consumers. There's data on that. I also have shopping data that nobody's bought. I can come to some conclusion that awareness might be there and I can test it by doing a survey. Do you know my brand? But also nobody's bought. So here I can then do in aggregates, not at the level of one consumer, that broadly in this market after my launch, awareness is high, but conversion is low. So what should be my advertising? It should be in the consideration area. So in the old world, before we had a lot of data being shared by consumers, we would work in this multi-channel format where not everything would talk to each other, but we'd still do some heuristics or some make-dos to understand how we could work with consumers. Now, of course, we know more, right? And therefore, we think of omni-channel as the information fulfillment continuum, which means that a consumer is taking both information from us and also giving us information at all times as they move across all the touch points. How do we capture that? Is one of the most critical ways of helping with the funnel. So let's go to a simpler example. Like we said, we spoke about the high involvement example illustration of education, your choice of a college, which you could argue is amongst the most complex and consequential choices you will have made. Let's take a simple example. Let's go to the movie. So it's Friday evening. You saw the trailers, but we now don't see just trailers, right? We first look at the comments next to the trailer. So I'll go to YouTube, see the trailer just pops up. Why did the trailer pop up? Because YouTube might have known that I like action movies or whatever genre. I see comments. If I'm a real fan, I will actually go and see some Reddit threads. Meaning I will go to any social website where conversation around that genre or that movie is happening. I may sample the music. So I'll go to any of the music streaming sites and start enjoying the music. And that builds a positive view of the movie, right? I may choose to say, okay, now should I spend a certain amount of time and money in going to the cinema, or should I go to an OTT channel where the movie will be coming in maybe a few weeks later, right? Having seen the movie, I may want to repeat the movie. I will take friends. I'll say, why don't you come with me? So there's referral. And I love the movie so much that I like that style, so I want exactly that jacket or that brand of merchandise the hero is wearing, or I want the label of the movie itself on me. Now this is a very low involvement category because we consume entertainment virtually all the time in today's day, right? And yet look at the process and understand that at each point of the process, somebody downloaded the music but never made it to the movies. If you are the producer, if by whatever way you could understand which consumers like the music, would you target them a little bit differently in your messaging than to those consumers who have not downloaded your music? Would you, as a producer of the movie, talk to people who've seen the trailer and liked the trailer? Would you talk to them differently compared to those who have not even seen the trailer? Meaning, these guys are likely in the consideration set, these guys are not even in the awareness set. So this is a very simple example of a low involvement product where the customer journey is extremely complex, but there are cues that we're picking up. And as marketers and business owners and entrepreneurs, we have to back ourselves to say, we will make the effort to understand each step so that we can nudge the consumer with the right input. Finally, the choice is theirs. We create the mix, the marketing mix, which you've seen in many other parts of this course. Which part of the mix should we change to get the consumer moving forward? And we spoke of the big change, which is first party data. Just a quick definition, we're not going to go into detail of this, but with the digital and retail footprint getting larger and larger, consumers are sharing more about themselves, so companies know more about them than they did earlier. So with the right first party data, we can do the right targeting. Once I know that your interest is a blue shirt or a Hindi movie, then you will only get discussion about that. I can personalize. If I know you're a student, maybe you need a discount on a group booking for a movie. Insights, a lot of people now like this kind of movie, so maybe we should make more movies like this, right? And it's cost efficient. If I'm talking to you in the language that you care, I will get a better response from you, and therefore my cost of doing business is lower. Cost of business includes advertising. It also includes pricing. You don't have to give a price discount to everybody. Once you understand your consumer, what their challenge was, why did they get out, and therefore things such as even discounts is targeted. Once you understand that was the barrier, right? So therefore, we are in a world where we should feel empowered as businesses to be close to our consumer, to make them walk the journey into a relationship that goes into purchase and eventually into loyalty. So just to summarize, therefore, customer journeys are very complex, but there are massive opportunities. And that is all in the context of this world. This lecture 20 years ago would have been a bit different because the context was fairly different. We established that journeys are very complex, and it does not matter whether we are buying an undergraduate education or a weekly movie. Multiple touch points and the opportunity, therefore, to touch and engage at every stage. The more we are able to move our understanding from one channel, so those who liked our songs on YouTube but have not bought, what should we offer them when they come to the booking ticket? This channel integration, this data change is relevant for every sector. Omnichannel is not just a retail discussion. It is a discussion in the context of the consumer that is touching all these channels. And the last is data-driven future. This future is entirely here, because we are now exchanging as consumers data with brands because we think there's value to be derived. Of course, it has got its rules, it's got its limitations, but I'm happy to share data if I see value in what will you do with my data. And there are only two principles. One, you will use it only for the deal that we have. I gave it data only for you to customize my shirt size. You cannot give it to someone else. And when I give it to you, then actually get good shirts of my size from you. You're actually using it well. So consumers look for value in the data and appropriate security around the data. And that is the minimum setup you require as a business if you want the data. And we just spoke of how, for example, data can therefore help you manage complexity, integration, and therefore a consumer outcome. But even stepping back, just as a last parting thought, at any point of time, all of the consumers of your category are in some stage. We have to go understand where they are at and produce appropriate offerings to keep nudging them. One ad does not make a sale. One retail store does not make a sale. It is what we do using those tools that we have working with the consumer that gets us the result that we seek, which is actually a first purchase, but even more than the first purchase, a lifetime of loyalty. Thank you.